Hello everyone, SimCFI here, and today we're going to go over the symbology used on low and high altitude Enroute charts used for IFR navigation. Now before we get into this real quick, just want to make a correction from the last video. On this procedure turn we did, you come out on the 207 heading and then you make a left-hand turn to heading 027, not a right-hand turn like I said in the video. Okay, so now that that's cleared up, so the low Enroute chart that we're looking at right now, these will cover the United States, and on SketVector I have world low, so they're all stitched together. You can also choose the specific chart, so this is an Enroute L2, and so now you get our legend, and it's just this specific chart like you're holding it, and you can also choose the high as well. Okay, so let's go back down to our area down here. So the low Enroute chart is made up of Victor airways that connect all the VORs. So Victor airway goes from one VOR to another VOR, like Mendocino to Williams. You'll be going on the Victor 200. And so now, when you're flying on these routes, we have to know what altitudes to be flying at, or at least what minimum altitudes there are. So this first altitude is going to be the minimum Enroute altitude, or MEA. So if you look right here, we have 6,200 feet. That is the minimum Enroute altitude for Victor 200. What that does is it guarantees terrain clearance at least 1,000 feet in non-mountainous areas and 2,000 feet in mountainous areas. And it also guarantees navigation signal coverage. So the next altitude is going to be the minimum obstruction clearance altitude. That's going to be identified by this asterisk, and you see it's a little bit lower than the MEA. So this is giving us the terrain clearance guarantee again, but it only guarantees navigation signal coverage if you're within 22 miles of the VOR. The next altitude we'll go over is the minimum reception altitude, or MRA. We have one of these down here at grid intersection. The intersections are the little triangles with the 5-letter identifier, and this MRA is identified by this flag with the letter R in it, and the minimum reception altitude is 4,000 feet. So if you're traveling along Victor 2-3 north and south, and you want to identify grid intersection via the Maxwell VOR, the 070 radial, then we're going to have to climb up to at least 4,000 feet to make sure we get that signal coverage. So we could be 3,000 feet coming down here, or even if you're at the minimum obstruction clearance altitudes, you're going to have to climb up to 4,000 if you want to receive the signal for this cross radial. Okay, the next altitude is going to be a minimum crossing altitude. We have one of these over here at Rango intersection. So if you're traveling on Victor 200 eastbound, we have to cross this fix at 8,500 feet. This is identified by the flag with the letter X. X for crossing, X for danger. And that's because the terrain is rising. You see the MEA goes up from 5,000 to 11,000. So they want to make sure you get a head start on that climb up to altitude to ensure your terrain clearance. Alright, and then there's one more altitude that you'll find every once in a while on a high altitude Enroute chart, and that's going to be a maximum authorized altitude, or MAA, and that's just the name implied. It's the maximum altitude that you can fly to make sure you still have that signal coverage. Alright, so aside from your Victor airways, a newer thing in the more modern times of IFR flying is going to be these T routes, these Tango routes, and they're in blue. So we got Tango 263, and these are GPS routes. And with these GPS routes, we can typically get a lower MEA because it's not totally relying on the ability of your signal coverage for the VORs. It's just GPS, so it allows you to go lower. It's a nice tool to use. Okay, now another thing to look at Enroute charts is airspace. So your Charlie airports are going to be identified by this dashed blue line with a shaded blue area. So those are your Charlie airports. And you note in the airport symbol there's a C here. That's for Charlie airspace. Your Delta airports are just going to be identified with the D in this box here for Delta Airspace. And your Bravo airports are identified by the solid blue line, kind of like it is on a sectional chart. It's shaded in, but you see with all these airspaces, you don't see the altitudes and all the other details. You have to go reference the VFR charts to get the details. You also see the 30 nautical mile Mode C veil that encompasses the Class Bravo airspace. So onto a high altitude Enroute chart. Let's select Enroute H3, so that's this chart here. And we have jetways instead of Victor Airways, so we have Jet 143 or Jet 1 and 3. And sometimes you'll see minimum en route altitudes for them too. And you also see they have Q routes, it's the same principle as the T route. They just made it Q for high altitude. So again, it's a GPS route that you can use on a high altitude en route chart. And then another thing to note, just a little tidbit with these high en route charts, is the airports that are listed are going to have at least a 5,000 foot paved runway. And so that's good to note. You know, if you're flying jets and you have an emergency, you probably need to go to a place that has 5,000 feet. Okay, so now let's hop back down to the low. And some of these other numbers, like this 12.7 over here, and this 14.8 over here, and this 4.9 over here, it kind of looks like the maximum elevation figure that you find on your sectional charts, like this 6.0 and 10.8. But this is the off-route obstruction clearance altitude, or ROCA. And it's calculated the same way as the MEF, the maximum elevation figure, where it gives you a couple hundred feet terrain clearance above the highest point in that square here, this latitude-longitude square. But in this case, they calculate that, and then they give you an additional 1,000 feet for non-mountainous areas, or an additional 2,000 feet for mountainous areas. So you'll see these numbers a little bit higher than your MEFs. Okay, so moving into the airports now, you can see they have a little bit less data. And so let's look at Marysville, Yuba County Airport. It's a green airport, so the first thing to note, you got different colors here, green, and then sometimes you see blue, and then there's brown airports. The blue and green airports have instrument procedures. The brown airports do not. So if you're flying along and you have an emergency in IFR, if you can make it to a green airport, you'll probably make it in. Because if you go to a brown airport, there's not going to be a procedure. So there's just that to think about. So getting into the data itself, Marysville, Yuba County, the identifier is MYV. The elevation is 64 feet. And then the L stands for lighting. The circle around the L means it's pilot-controlled lighting. And the 60 is the length of the longest runway in hundreds of feet, so 6,000 foot runway. You notice they're not giving you all the frequencies that they do on the sectional. You have to go check that in other places. So now going down to Sacramento International SMF, it's a Charlie airspace, 27 feet elevation, it's got lighting all the time, 8,600 foot runway is the longest runway, and then here this A in parentheses means this frequency is ATIS. And let's look at one more. So we got Sacramento Executive. We have D for Delta Airspace. A star next to it means it's part-time, so it means the tower does close. Elevation 24 feet. Pilot-controlled lighting. 5,500 foot runway, and the ATIS is 125.5. Alright, let's look at the VORs now. And so right down here, the Sacramento Vortec. It's a Vortec identified by the black squares. And you just have to look at the compass rose and find the line that comes out to the box here. And so we have Sacramento. It's on frequency 115.2. The identifier is SAC. The channel is 99. That's military. So you don't have to worry about that. This is your Morse code identifier and the geographic location. And then some additional info with it is the H here indicates HIWAS. That's Hazardous In-Flight Weather Advisory Service. So you can listen to the VOR and get some extra weather info. And then down here, this is the you can contact Rancho Marietta Flight Service Station through this VOR. Now with this frequency up here, 122.05. Now you notice there's an underline for the VOR frequency, which means no voice comes over the frequency. There's other VORs where you can transmit over the frequency, so like at Marysville, you got Rancho Marietta Flight Service Station, and what you can do is this frequency with the R, that means they receive, so you transmit on 122.1 and you can listen to them over the VOR on 10.8. Or you can use frequency 122.6 and just transmit and listen like normal. Another thing with the Marysville VOR, well, first you see it's a VOR DME. VOR is the hexagon, DME is the square around it. That's a little bit different from the Vortec. Vortecs automatically have DME, so they don't have a little square. And Vortecs are also part TACAN, so they have the military component. But with the Marysville VOR, you see this parentheses T. That means it's a terminal VOR. And just a note, if you're coming into these videos, without watching my prior videos, you probably want to go watch the video on radio aids to navigation that I did a while back, and it really describes how VORs work and the different types of VORs, terminal, low, and high altitude VORs. Those will all be very important to note for IFR training. Alright, so we learned how to identify these VORs here. Alright, so another thing we'll get on a high Enroute chart, I forgot to mention, and you might see it on low Enroute charts as well, but you can get what's called an MEA gap. So we have that here, minimum inner altitude gap, and what that's saying is there might be a gap in signal coverage along this route. So it's just something to be aware of. Alright, back to the low. So we're going to talk about VOR changeover points. So when we're going from one VOR to another, let's say we're going from Mendocino VOR down here along Victor 199, going up to Red Bluff Vortec. These are both Vortecs, I should say. We have to know when we're gonna navigate from Mendocino, but at some point we need to switch over and navigate to Red Bluff. And where do we do that? There's three things to look for. You're gonna look for a little Z symbol. Which we'll find in a second, right down here. So this little Z symbol is the VOR changeover point, so it's saying at this point you need to switch over to the next VOR. So you look for that. You look for a bend in the airway, which we have here. So in Victor 195 at Bessa, that would be a VOR changeover point. So you'd be navigating from Williams VOR. Once you get to Bessa, you have to navigate to the Oakland VOR, I think this one is. Here we go, yep, Oakland, VOR DME. Otherwise, if you don't see the bend, and if you don't see the little Z symbol, then you need to just calculate the distance halfway from one point to the other, and halfway is when you change over from one VOR to another. And that's another thing that I did in the last video. Can't remember the exact point where I did that, but basically I found one of those VOR changeover points, but I was basically doing it in the wrong direction. The Z is always gonna go perpendicular like that to your route. Alright, so now some of the other markings you'll see, you want to know distance information. So let's say again we're going from Mendocino Vortec to Red Bluff Vortec. As we're traveling this way, on the 021 radial, we have this number 14 and arrow to Weplow intersection. So this is saying that from Mendocino Vortec to Weplow is 14 miles. And now here, Weplow to Sabby is 4 miles, but from the Vortec it's 18. So this little symbol here means DME from the Vortec. So far you've gone 18 miles. This little leg is 4 miles. So now from this waypoint to this waypoint it's 12 miles, but from the Vortec it's 30. And now a new symbol right up here, the 79 in the box, that is the total distance between Mendocino Vortec and the Red Bluff Vortec. And then now you see these numbers coming the opposite direction out of the Red Bluff Vortec. So we got 10 miles to Obg, and we got 6 miles to Henley, and 16 miles from Red Bluff to Henley. And you see we got another minimum crossing altitude here. So if you're on Victor 199 going southbound, you have to cross it at 5,800 feet. And you can also note the altitude changes by this little dinner plate here sitting on the sides. So if there's an MEA change, you're going to see that along here too. Okay, so another little symbol right here, we have this 109.8 CIC35. This is saying you can identify Henley via the 266 radio from the Chico VOR, which is down here. And this 35 is the channel for the Vortec, so that's just a military thing. So 109.8 is the Chico VOR, and you can identify Henley via the 266 radio. So sometimes when you see these things back here at grid, we could use that cross radio, and you might have an MRA to go along with that. Alrighty, so some other points. Sometimes you see these the Vortex, VORs, and intersections with a white background or not filled in, and sometimes you see them filled in black, like the Mendocino Vortec. And so if the intersection or the nav aid is filled in black like this, that means it's a compulsory reporting point, and that's going to be the topic of a later subject, reporting points for IFR. Okay, another thing you'll see on the charts is these little boxes here. This is telling you like the local center frequency for this area, so you can get in touch with Oakland Center on 127.8, and that's just a handy little tip there. You also see the boundaries of centers on the charts up here. So as you're traveling northbound, you cross this boundary, you're going from Oakland Center to Seattle Center, and so you can see that boundary up here. Alrighty. You can see some of the military operating areas, some of the special use airspace as well in the chart. But that pretty much covers the majority of the symbols that you're going to see on the chart. If you want to get more information on every single symbol, basically that's possible, you want to go to that Aeronautical Chart Users Guide that I mentioned in the last video. And this will tell you everything you need to know about all the symbols. And if you want a little more guidance on instrument flying, go to the Instrument Flying Handbook, and this will give you a lot of extra info as well. Alrighty, so we'll hope to see you in the next video and to actually do some flying.